June 11th, 1583, there was a discussion, lectures and a debate in Oxford, in this university. And a group of theology lecturers sat up there to tell the assembled students about the tenets of Aristotle. At the time, if you say that any of the tenets of Aristotle were wrong, among which was that the world was flat, and that the sun went around the earth, as a student you were fined 5 shillings, an enormous amount of money in those days. And if you carried on, you were thrown out of the university, you risked being burned at the stake. And these wise members of the Oxford establishment sat up there and preached this total nonsense to the students. And just for once, one young man got up in a monk's costume, because he was a monk, and he threw back his towel and he started to argue with them. And he was an Italian refugee. He fled from Catholic Italy for fear of his life. He'd gone to Protestant Geneva and fled there in fear of his life. He ended up in Oxford as a political religious refugee. And he argues that the teachings of Nicholas Copernicus, that in fact the earth went around the sun, was the truth. And he further argues, to everybody's horror, that the ceiling wasn't a closed vault like this, but actually infinite space, with an infinite number of worlds beyond it. There was horror. This young man, Giordano Bruno, was driven out of Oxford. He was driven back into exile for disputing the accepted shibboleth, the accepted establishment line. Everybody knew was absolutely true. They were as certain that it was true as the people out there are certain of what they think is true. As certain as you are of your truths as well. Absolutely certain. They drove him from this place back to Europe. He was kidnapped. He was taken to Rome. He was imprisoned in disgusting conditions for 7 years by the Inquisition, and in 1600 burned at the stake because he insisted on believing that the earth goes around the sun and not the other way. And every generation has its sacred towns, its absolute certainties. And sometimes they're right. So I think we can be pretty sure that the earth does indeed go around the sun, not the other way around. Sometimes their sacred cows are correct, but very often they're wrong. And when you're there in that time, that mindset, you cannot begin to know which is wrong and which is right. But the moment you have an establishment, an elite of any sort, which believes it has the right to say this is wrong and you shall not say it, then you turn on this totalitarian mentality with people, which you've seen there tonight. That's a mob that could kill. Perfectly happily.
The circumstances tonight have led to research associated with
I see these old ladies and old men with war medals to the ground and kick them and try to kill them. I've seen the same people. We know well, there's only 1,000 of them. And it's the same organisation, it's the same kind of people. It's that hideous, violent mentality which an establishment or elite gets is entirely right. And that is why any freedom restriction or freedom of speech is so dangerous. Because it opens the floodgates once you condemn and you put it beyond the pale and then you attack and you start by saying you should not speak. You end up by burning up the state.
For information, the elite establishment that you speak of, the vast majority of people outside, are not, as a matter of fact, using Oxford University.
Indeed, they're not. I agree with what you're saying.
By their eliteness and their elite establishment that we talk about.
They're following the thought patterns established by the liberal elite which dominates their They're following the elite. They're doing some stuff that have been taught in kindergarten in various liberal left propaganda productions on television. They're following exactly what they've been taught by their parents. Had they grown up in Nazi Germany, most of them be splendid Nazis because they can hold it. Now, I'll keep at the end of it. I'm really finished now. But the thing is, the moment you accept the right of either an elite or a mob to impose restrictions on freedom of speech for one person, you are accepting their right to impose restrictions of speech for everybody. Free speech is an absolute, it's indivisible. Either everybody has free speech, or if only the people with whom the establishment or the mob agree, no one has meaningful freedom of speech. That's a simple fact. There are, in English common law, certain unavoidable restrictions which are just about acceptable. not least because common law goes back so long, it is things that by wisdom and experience. So, for instance, in English common law, my right to sweeten my fist ends where this ordinance begins, and rightly so. There is no right to incite direct violence, to say, right, go and attack these people, I didn't say what to attack them. There's never been a right to do that. There are laws of libel and sedition. There is an offence of behaviour like the belief to a breach of the peace. Those could restrict freedom of speech, but only in a way when it's absolutely essential. To give you one final indication of how dangerous restriction of freedom of speech is and how it is understood, the point already raised about shouting fire in a crowded theatre. Well, yes, it's dangerous, obviously so, although on the face of it, as long as the theatre is filled with adults and they've seen no smoke, they will at least fire out sensibly and not run the risk of crushing anybody to death. But think of where this case came from, where this little dictator of the church came from. It was a case, Scheck and the USA, in 1919. And Mr. Scheck, the rights that they were taking away from him was not the right to shout fire in a crowded theatre. That's a piece of rhetorical sophistry such as you've already seen here. What he was saying, he was a socialist radical. And in 1918, he was out there leafleting, handing out leaflets against the draft in the United States of America. He was saying, don't send these young men, not volunteers, don't force them to go and be slaughtered in a war that's got nothing to do with us. And that supposedly sensible sounding dictator is actually one of the early examples of the state creating fresh laws to silence political dissent. And Mr. Scheck should have been entitled to campaign against the draft. Even that flower piece of rhetoric is a bad law. The only restrictions you should accept on your freedom of speech, which is what we're talking about, is the basic English common law, absolutely essential. Thus far and not one step further. Thank you.